Hey y'all, what's up? It's Anthony with another episode of Everything Connects. And today I'm inviting you to listen in on a great conversation. So I hope you can hang out with us for a little bit. We all know everyone wants to be successful in life, but success means different things to different people. For some, success is developing the intestinal fortitude to overcome challenges and obstacles. For others, it's a certain financial stability. And for others, it's a respected career field or contributing to society in a meaningful way. And for others, it's raising a healthy and happy family. My guest today is unique in the fact that he's figured out a way to check each of those boxes. And most impressively, he had to take a pretty non-conventional path in order to get there. Here to share his unique story and some of the most valuable life lessons he's learned along his path is my friend, husband, father, veteran, surgeon, Dr. Zach Logan. Enjoy. Dr. Zach Logan. Dr. Logan, in the building. Thanks so much for stopping by.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I'm excited.
You made it. You're a freaking doctor. One of the highest and most esteemed careers in all of the world.
Yeah, it's been a long journey, long road. We'll kind of get into how that came about and just the support that takes. And nothing happens in isolation. The sense of arrival, I think, is something again we can talk about. But there's always that. Is there more to things? Are there other things, improvement, different stuff that you can do? So
one of the reasons I wanted to have you here, and one of the things I respect about you most is you're a regular dude. You're not someone who I see that was born with some distinct silver spoon advantage. I would bet if someone did a survey, how many people have gone from enlisted soldier to surgeon, it's probably 1%.
Yeah, I can't think of very many.
The path doesn't get more unconventional than that.
Yeah.
Did you always know you were much smarter than everyone else around you?
I don't know about much smarter, but no, I had an idea that peer group wise, and I had that feedback sometimes from teachers or mentors. So
I imagine you as like a first grader doing calculus and other kids are eating crayons. How's it work?
Pretty close to that. Yeah, no, pretty close. First grade, honestly, was the time Mrs. Neighbors, Wilson Elementary. She was like, "You're done with all your stuff. Here's some other stuff to do," and it wasn't eating crayons.
Here's some other stuff. It's my taxes.
Sure. It was those projects. I mean, it was. This is early '80s, mid '80s. There was not a whole lot of I guess gifted or talented gifted, here's what we call it in Texas. So they kind of had to come up with some other stuff for us to do. And there were several of us, I wasn't alone in that, but
yeah,
it's like, yes, you can color in the lines, like, let's get you something else.
Yeah.
And there's more to you than that, than what we currently have as a curriculum.
So we're going to talk about a bunch of other things, but before I forget, I want to say there are a lot of smart people who make a lot of poor decisions with their life.
Yeah.
Not to necessarily vilify a person who doesn't reach a certain level of success, but I want to make sure that we're not undercutting the decisions that you made that put you in the position to ascend to where you have.
For sure. You're, it's not always like that gift that you have is easy to waste, I would say.
That's a good way to put it.
And if it weren't for things like ambition and a support network that can kind of foster that,
yeah,
I mean, that may be me,
right.
And there's a lot of people that I think that applies to. I think, like you said, the business world, the political world, there are a lot of athletics. There's a kind of a, I don't know, landfill, if you will, of just litter of people that didn't make it for those types of reasons. And I mean, I can think of a lot of those that you're a victim of your decisions.
Right.
You're subject to your the outcomes, the repercussions, and raising teenagers now. That's something that's hard to impress on people. And to it took me a while. Like my path is non-traditional. Like there's a whole lot easier ways to do what I did, I think, but wouldn't trade it.
Right.
So
your path being so distinct, let's talk about it. What was it like? Did you know as a kid, I want to be a surgeon?
I wanted to be a pilot. Like, I wanted to fly planes. Like, some of my early memories are building models with my dad and different Air Force planes and things like that. And so that's what I wanted to do. So as far as like early childhood aspirations, it was not medicine. I remember, I think maybe like 4th, 5th, 6th grade, somewhere in there, I remember hearing that anesthesiologists made a lot of money, and I was just like, I want to be an anesthesiologist. Like, that sounds cool.
Yeah.
But in the background, I was still like, I want to be a helicopter pilot. Or
have you seen the new Top Gun?
I have not.
Come on now.
I know. I need
80s
to.
kid ain't seen the new Top Gun?
I need to.
Yeah.
I need to.
So you're thinking at this age, you want to be a pilot. That's a very esteemed career also.
Yeah.
Your parents supportive?
Yes and no. So I definitely supported, but in the sense of, I remember I was probably a hard kid to raise from like a keep him focused sort of thing, not like ADHD focused, but just like I wanted to do a lot of things. Like I had a lot of hobbies growing up, and I mean, I not poor by any means, but like didn't have the resources to just fund everything that Zach wanted to do. Like, it's very different now, I think, for my children. I have to pull back and not just throw money at whatever it is that they like, the flavor of the week. My flavor of the week was like to go to the library and just check out every single book on a topic and just have it come like, how many can I get? Like, this many? Perfect. And by the time the due date came around, I was already off of whatever it was. I would check out every single thing, and a lot of them were aviation books or military books, and I read a lot of just stories about soldiers and just things like that. And so I kind of started leaning a little bit towards those types of things. But it was just hobby books, there's no internet. There's no like, just scroll through and see what it is that you like and learn as much of about something. You had to read a book. And so I'd go to the school library or the public library and do all that. And so that aspect of things would be like, 1 week I would want to do this, 1 week I would want to do that, like even career wise. And so there wasn't that like sense of purpose that I think a lot of my peer group now had.
They knew pretty early.
Pretty
committed.
And some of that too, I mean, may come from the fact that my parents being veterinarians, like all of her clients, like I still, they still chat and they know what I'm up to now, and like they've kept track and that sort of thing. And it was almost a foregone conclusion, I think, that, Zach's just going to go be a vet. Like he likes doing this. He likes being around the clinic and the medical side. Like that was essentially my first job, was just being one of the medical assistants for my mom at the clinic. And
what awesome exposure at a young age.
For sure. Yeah, it was. I mean, there was some challenges for that sort of stuff. It was a little bit of a struggle for them. They, veterinary medicine has, I don't know if they paid a vet bill anytime soon, but they can be expensive now. But it wasn't always like that. It's sometimes, people would, it was cheaper to put an animal down for sure than it was to take care of them like you would your son or your daughter.
Especially in the 80s.
In the 80s, yeah.
You drop somebody a multi-$1,000 bill, they're like...
Yeah, and even now, it's still kind of like that. I mean, I know we had animals when I was a child that people wanted put down, and it was just like my mom would just take care of it pro bono, and then we'd end up with them until they could either recover or didn't. And so we kind of had a little bit of a zoo at the house for a while. But
so, I talk a lot in my book about parenting techniques and styles, and very much like you said, it's a continual process. There's never really an arriving, right? You never really go, I've mastered it. You want to do what's best for your children, but also it's the balance of realizing like they're their own people. So it's always that balance of how much do I steer you and guide you versus how much, sometimes, as you probably know, that it can become counterproductive, right? You push them to go one way and they rebel against you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You mentioned, that feeling of arrival. I mean, that you said parenting, like that's just life. To me, like it's hard to feel like you've made it, so to speak, sometimes. Or like what's over the next hill. what else do we have?
Right.
My son said something to me recently. I kind of asked him / encouraged him to try out for the wrestling team at the high school, and he didn't really like it. Like, it's not his thing. Like,
this was the oldest boy.
This is the oldest, yeah. So
he's a football player,
stout
kid, athletic kid.
Yeah, and that, I mean, I'm from Oklahoma. Like, that was kind of
got to wrestle for your dinner.
Yeah, it's, if you didn't do that, it's like, I mean, I was too short to play basketball, I thought, and that was during the same time. So, like, I was not the greatest at it, but I enjoyed doing it. And looking back, maybe probably should have put more effort into that. And then there's this Al Bundy syndrome where you're like, you want to push your kids to do things. And I try not to lean on him too much, but I did enough that he's like, we're not the same person. Oh, wow. And I was like, well, you're right. That's why I'm not leaning on you completely. Like, I'm not, he's like, I don't know if I want to wrestle next year. I was like, that's fine.
So did he wrestle for the season?
He definitely finished the season. Okay. I told him, I was like, look.
So he wrestled a full season of high school wrestling.
Yeah. So I said, you can quit. That's fine. But you can't quit until the season's over.
Right.
If you don't want to do it next year, that's fine. And I told him too, like, if you're not going to play basketball, like, and he probably could or should have done that. But I said, if you're not going to play basketball, that's fine. But you're not going to do nothing. Yeah. Football season's over. You're not just going to kind of wait around until track starts, which was his next thing. Yeah. And I was like, I said, start looking at all of the schools, all of the college coaches that talk about wrestlers in high school and recruiting and like how to use your hands, how to balance, like, all of that sort of in the trenches mindset. Yeah. And let's just try it. Let's see what happens.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't.
And that's tough to just
I don't know if he won a match. Like, I don't know, to be honest. Like,
because if he won, you'd know.
Yeah.
I like how you had his back right there, but you'd know if he won because you'd be standing like, he did it.
For sure.
I love there's so many valuable life lessons in youth sports. I love that you didn't let him quit in the middle of a season.
Yeah.
That's a big thing that my wife and I have done. My son played lacrosse and it was the same thing. Hated it 2 games in. And we're like, well, you don't have to play again next season, but you're finishing out. I think so many valuable life lessons and so much character development comes from not only what parents instill in the kids, but like you making sure that they're living a life that serves them later. The skill of not quitting, of finishing something, it's going to serve them in anything they want to do, be it a relationship, a career, education, whatever.
That's why I'm sitting here.
Yeah,
I mean, to be honest, like it's, and one of the things about, I thought wrestling too for him was like, it's an individual sport. Mm-hmm. Like there's nobody else out there, but I mean, he got ragdolled a bit. And to me, like it wasn't, I didn't take pleasure in that, but at the same time, I'm like, he kind of, you feel sometimes like you're a big worm on a little hook. Yeah. He's like, I got this. And I'm like, and when somebody mops the mat with you, and I've been there, like it sucks. Yeah. It absolutely sucks. And it's just a big old slice of humble pie. Yeah. And it's kind of like good for him in a sense, like, okay, here's what I got to do.
Right.
And I'm not pushing him, but I think he's doing it next year. Like, well, I
think
he's
so. Go back at it?
I think so.
Right.
Maybe with not as much trepidation, which I think is good. Like once those butterflies, like getting that out of your system.
You already got whooped.
Yeah, for sure. Like what else do I have to lose? Like let me just go try and score some points and get stronger. And that was the main thing too. Like I told him, I said, through that, we'll call it failure, but through that trial and tribulation, you come out the other side of that, and sure, like you didn't get any medals for it, but you got some lessons, and those will last a whole lot longer.
For sure. I love the juxtaposition of that approach versus what you said earlier, worrying about because even me as a person who hasn't accomplished as much as you professionally, given what I come from, so much of what I've done in my life has been create a better life for my kids and my family moving forward, right?
Yeah.
And so my kids face almost none of the hardships that I face, which is great. But then I find myself being like, oh man, is their life too easy, right? Because it's those challenges and hardships that
Entirely.
that give us mettle and give us character.
Absolutely.
So I love how you talked about, I don't want to give my kids too much. You want them to have a great life, but you also don't want to raise cream puffs that never had to overcome an obstacle. So I love that within the safety and confines of a healthy and happy home where dad and mom are accomplished and their relationship's great, you could tell them, hey, you better get out there and fight this big dude. And and if you lose, I'll give you a ride home and we'll talk about it. You know what I mean? I just love that.
Yeah. And he felt sometimes, I think, like he was letting me down, like personally. And I still love you.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think any less of you because you're not awesome at something that I was mediocre at anyway.
Right.
You know, like, but you tried it, you did it.
Yeah.
And that's a hell of a lot more than, you know, a lot of kids, number one, and then you finish it, which is, there were kids that quit. Yeah. So like, this is how I look at it. I don't want my kids to struggle, but when they do, I want them to appreciate that there is some, you know, like, and I think that's what you're saying. Like you want to, especially as a dad, you want to protect and provide and those sorts of things, but you can go overboard with that.
100%.
Like providing the basics is important, but the basics are not the newest backpack for school or the newest
Gucci.
brand new shoes, a brand new car, you know, whatever it is. Like,
oh yeah, you're about to be getting a car soon,
man.
Huh?
Yeah, we're already shopping.
What are we getting?
We are already shopping.
Beamer, Benz, or Bentley?
Yeah. I'm hoping he's going to be driving a '98 Chevy with the tailgate that barely shuts, and like, you know, but you know, just the appreciation of things, and knowing that you don't have to have everything, and it's tough. Like that's our society.
So one of the things I kind of glossed over, but for listeners who may not know, what exactly is an orthopedic surgeon?
Orthopedics is all basically bone and joint. So muscles, musculoskeletal care. It's as a blue collar sort of thing in medicine as you can be. One of my colleagues, he said, he's like, I can't think of another field where you can go to school for 14 years after high school and it's as physical as what we do.
Wow.
And it's true. I mean, there are days I went to work as a firefighter, worked 24-hour shift, didn't sweat as much as I do doing hips all day.
Yeah.
You know, because as a firefighter, you were paid for what you could do, not what you did.
Right.
Like there's a possibility, but there were times where you're like, okay, nothing's happening.
Walk me through this. As you come out of high school, you have no idea. As you finish high school, what are you thinking career-wise?
Finishing high school was Army. So
Army.
I
My
had,
guy.
Yeah, there we go.
My God.
Going into senior year was kind of when it was evident that I was not going to be the 4-year college kid.
Meaning what? That you were kind of
just wasn't focused enough on the stuff that I think that would have created that environment, we'll say.
Smart kid. Grades didn't necessarily reflect that.
Yes. Yeah. So my mom keeps a lot of stuff. Like I've got these boxes of like report cards and stuff from like when I was younger, and they all say the same thing.
Lax focus.
Like,
Yeah.
I was just like, this is stupid. Like what? Why do I need to learn linear algebra? Like it's completely pointless.
Right. Before you got here today, I was having this fight with my daughter as I was checking some of her summer math.
Oh my God.
It's like, why do I need to learn how to move decimals to percentages?
And hearing the same stuff that came out of my mouth now come out of my son's mouth is just like, I've called my mom.
Gut punch.
Yeah. I've texted her and been like, I'm so sorry. Like that story I think happens to a lot of, you mentioned, smart kids or smart people. Those decisions that you make, like sometimes you can overcome them. Sometimes you can't.
Sometimes you can't.
But
so you were recognized pretty early as a really like pretty smart and gifted kid. By the time you got to high school, you were still obviously a smart person, but you were kind of.
I was wasting it, and enough people. Like I had a few teachers. You know, there's teachers that kind of break through to you.
Coaches,
that sort of stuff, and be like, they can't really just snatch you up and shake you and say, what's wrong with you. Mm-hmm. But effectively, that's kind of what happens. You know, it's just like, why are you wasting this talent? So I mean, from a going to college 4-year sort of thing, like at least at the time, and it was probably not on the radar at all. That wasn't in the plan. So I joined the Army. Enlisted. Yeah. So a month after graduation, my brother and my dad and I kind of took a little road trip out west and just drove around, and a few weeks of doing that. And then basically that next month was at Fort Leonard Wood. But I mean, again, just growing up, and like my heroes weren't ball players necessarily. They were guys that I read about in Medal of Honor book from the library, G.I. Joes, or
Sure.
whatever it was. So the military side of things was appealing, for sure. And so in a kind of a weird twist of fate, the counselor at MEPS ended up being my girlfriend's dad. So he was the one that knew all of the. He's think of it like HR. So the HR person for the Army, and they show you, here's the jobs that you qualify for. Yep. You know, here's your scores. You're smart enough to do this. You're physically fit enough to do this. You've got whatever these tests are, different.
What qualifications?
Different
you have
qualifications.
For different jobs?
Yeah, for sure. So, and that was his job. So he brought home some paperwork one time about Army firefighting. And he's like, man, I don't see this. I was over there hanging out, we were about to eat dinner or whatever. And he comes in from the office and is like, hey, you want to be a firefighter, right? And so at the time, like I knew I wasn't going to do the 4-year thing. I was looking at going to one of the local community colleges and getting, some education, firefighting education, kind of associate's degree, essentially. Getting in the fire department is not easy. It's not by any means, and it's less so now, but it's harder now than it has been, because it's stable employment, retirement, good work schedule,
hard job that needs proficient people.
It's hard when you do it, but you get that kind of time off, and so it's appealing for a lot of different reasons. And so there were a few of us that wanted to go do that. Mine ended up working out.
So he comes home with paperwork.
He comes home.
What about this?
Yeah, have you thought about doing this? Because I don't know that. I had been to MEPS twice, and the first time was I made it kind of through the processing. Not that it's competitive, but you just kind of go through that step. And I'd met with recruiters. I'd had a Marine sticker on my car whenever I was in high school, and like I kind of was like, I knew I was leaning that way military wise. A couple months pass, girlfriend's dad shows up with the papers and like, Army firefighting, like it'll be in your contract. Wow. Everything's, and he's like, and I don't see this very much. Your scores work, all this, like he knows my packet, like it's all there. Scores work, and they're only going to sign up like a very small number of them, because most of it's civilian contractors.
I was going to say, I never even, as a former Army officer, I never knew that firefighting was an Army thing.
Yeah, most of them it's civilians, and even at the bases where we go and ended up going, it's at least half civilians, and probably more so now. So
the stars aligned, because that sounds pretty rare.
Stars aligned, and so I was
for you to have all the qualifications on top of it.
Yeah, and something that I wanted to do, and it just like this might work out. Yeah. So a month after I graduated, I left. Wow. Go to Leonard Wood.
Did your parents look on that a little more favorably, or not? It didn't matter.
No, they were.
You're still wearing an Army uniform.
Yeah, it's putting the cart in front of the horse a little bit to I guess tell the rest of the story. So that's my father-in-law now.
Oh wow! So you guys got married.
So so for the longest time, my parents, particularly my mom, like held it against him, big time. Like wouldn't really talk to him. I'm gone. Like I'm at basic. I'm at AIT. Like I don't know any of this stuff's going on. Yeah. Like, but.
In her mind, he convinced you to do that.
Yeah, and took me away from either where I was going, where I was headed, which
took you away from pharmacology school.
Yeah.
Animal pharmacology.
Yeah. Like looking back now, like taking me away from where I was headed is probably the best thing that ever happened to me.
Yeah.
Because where I was headed, where she thought I was headed,
Two different places.
probably two different things. Right. So, it was awesome. Like DoD Fire Academy, it had moved not too long before we got there. It had moved from Illinois. I didn't realize it at the time, but the sweetest deal for me was being from Oklahoma. Oklahoma State is very highly regarded, like in the fire service. So all of the manuals that are published, like if you're outside the state of Texas and California, there might be a few others, then all of the licensure and the certificates are all stamped with Oklahoma State, you know, and I'm like, this is like, and I didn't know it, like even joining, I thought I was going to get some training, come out and then I kind of have to go from there. But I'm like, everything I'm doing here is going to apply later.
Yeah. Is that what you did then? Did you do your 4 years and then go become a civilian firefighter?
I did. Yeah. So not like right away, but like during that, got stationed Fort Wainwright, Alaska.
Oh, wow.
Little did I know, father-in-law, then girlfriend's dad, calls, however it works.
Pull some strings?
I was supposed to go to Fort Benning.
Okay.
He's like, yeah, Benning's too close to my daughter. Like, we're going to have to send you to...
Where was she at the time? She was still in Oklahoma, right?
She was still in Oklahoma.
He didn't even want you in Georgia?
Too close.
Wow.
So, and I don't know if it was conceptually too close or physically too close, but it was a test, right? So I'm gonna send you up to Alaska. We'll send you to Wainwright and see, and like, again, whatever comes out on the end of this is going to be set in stone at that point. And so
you were doing a long distance relationship.
Yeah, we got married, and I was in Alaska, and I ended up getting out after my first enlisted tour, and at that point I had already started kind of applying to civilian fire departments back home in Oklahoma City and Midwest City area. Yeah. But it was the Friday before school started, like college started. I get a letter, it's like unsealed letter in the mail from Midwest City Fire Department saying, hey, thanks for coming out. It's essentially what it said, you know, like, you did really well in the process, but we're going to kind of move forward with some other people. And I was just like, oh. So I get this like mail time, like 3 p.m. on a Friday. And I'm like, okay, well now what? Like plan B, like we got to go right now. This isn't going to work out. Like, okay, plan B, how am I going to kind of get the formal education background, like to augment the certificates and the Army background and small unit stuff, just, leadership, whatever that is. Like, how do I make my packet better so that there's not a question as to who they're hiring next time? Yeah. And so then I started school Monday. Wow. Like, it was like, let's go. Wow. So then it was, English classes or whatever, like calculus, like, just go. Okay, that's great. I'm spending money. I'm using my GI Bill. Now I got to start making some. How am I going to do that? Yeah. So I got a job as the VA work study, the Veterans Affairs work study program there at OSU OKC. And so what I was doing is I was processing vets, their education benefits. Mm-hmm. So guys that are using their GI Bill. At that time, you had 10 years to use whatever benefits you had, or they were going the 10-year thing, they were going to run out of their benefits. Right. And I saw so many people like that. And I told myself, I'm like, that's not going to be me. I'm going to make sure that I use all of this, that I'm eligible for, because I earned it.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
so you're like, I'm going to go be a doctor with this shit.
Eventually that kind of worked out that way. But I had sent a letter to the fire department in Stillwater, in Oklahoma. It's the college town for Oklahoma State. And so I had sent a letter while I was still in the Army. I was like, hey, just a cold letter. Like, there's no, emailing, or at that time, internet's.
You're basically sending it into the abyss.
Just snail mail. Like, hey, this is me. Here's my certificates. They're from DOD, but they're all Oklahoma State stuff. are you guys hiring? Like, let's make this happen. And so the guy mails me back and is like, hey, we're not really looking right now, but we're going to be hiring soon. Like, I remember that there's a kind of a handwritten note at the bottom, like,
try again.
Try again. But it was in, we're going to be hiring again in September.
Yeah.
Like we've
something encouraging.
And it's, something encouraging, just like that carrot to kind of dangle. And I don't know what the numbers were at the time, but there's, again, a lot of applicants, and they're not hiring like 30 people. They're hiring one.
Wow.
They have one guy that's retiring, and they're hiring one to fill that spot in a department that size.
Wow.
But there's that note, and I'm like, okay. So at that time, I'm taking just my basics, my prereqs, trying to work on, and my initial plan of at least getting some formal education. And so meanwhile, it's a desk job. I've gotten out of the Army. I'm not PTing.
Yeah.
Like I'm trying to stay in shape, but it's
getting a little doughy.
Tough. Oh, I was the doughiest I've ever been. It was pretty doughy. So this is now kind of I've worked the work study for a year. Took the test again for Stillwater, and it was kind of a gut check because I'm out of shape at this point. Like, it's the test isn't like crazy physical. It's basically like a PT test with a couple of like functional fitness sorts of things, but 1.5 mile run under a certain period of time. And I remember being on that run, and it was around this park, and I'm like, man, that's a long way. That's like, it's not that far. It's like 1.5 miles, like it's a sprint. Like had done way better than that in the Army. Yeah. But just had gotten a little soft, and that was the gut check that kind of changed things. There's kind of this like butterfly effect of events that happen, things that happen in the course of a lifetime. That was definitely one of them. And there's obviously some definitely more physical struggles than just trying to go from point A to point B under a certain period of time. But like, there's nobody helping you. There's nobody pushing you. It's just like your mental, I need to get from here to there, and I need to do it faster.
That warrior energy.
And it just, so that ended up working out. I got on at Stillwater. At that point, I just wanted a firefighting job. I wasn't looking at, Stillwater being at Oklahoma State, but in the shadow of a college campus. I had my GI Bill, and I had 2 days out of 3 off. From the educational side of things, I was just like, I have no excuse not to go to college. And so I started at Oklahoma State as wanting to do fire protection. So engineering, so like sprinkler systems, safety systems.
And now you're giving people total hips and total knees.
Now doing total hips, total knees, because it was the medical side of things that really grabbed me. You're riding the ambulance a bunch. And so I was doing a lot of medical stuff. We're taking people to the ER. We're picking up people, kind of street medicine, so to speak. So pre-hospital care. But
keeping people alive till they get to the hospital.
Yeah, till they get to the hospital. And then when we get to the hospital, like taking nothing against ER physicians, but there wasn't a whole lot that they were doing after we got them there.
Charting.
Charting and making phone calls, try to divvy out stuff. And I'm like, well, these guys are making 10 times what I'm making. And numbers wise, frequency wise, they're working the same days a month. And half a shift. So they would work 12s.
With, I'm assuming, half the stress, because when you arrive on the scene, you don't know what you're walking into.
Yeah, different stress.
Different stress.
Yeah, different stress.
That's fair. That's fair.
The chaos had kind of been bundled up a little bit for them, and then we're getting them there, and then it was like their stress, I think, was the disposition. So like, we just set them down, and it's like, okay, it's your problem now. But that's when the gears started turning as to like, okay, is medicine like formal, not pre-hospital, but is medicine the thing? And so snowballed. That's just at that point. So I changed from fire protection engineering to zoology, which is, the biology basically of animals and the interwoven systems of animals and that sort of stuff, which sounds random.
It does not sound random. It's perfectly aligned with exactly how this whole story started.
Yeah, for
your veterinary parents.
Yeah.
Veterinarian parents.
And so for me, it was like watching somebody play pool. You can tell they're setting up their next shot, right? The ball rolls to a certain place, right? I didn't want to do something. So say this medicine thing doesn't work out. I didn't want to have this degree that was going to be functionally useless. A biology degree to me, like, yeah, you can go be a teacher. That's not what I wanted to do. I either wanted to be a firefighter, but then it started kind of morphing. And part of the reason it morphed a little bit was like, there's not a whole lot of old firefighters that aren't like kind of broken down a little bit. Like,
super tough.
And nothing, again, taking nothing away from them. It's blue collar sort of thing. And
it's hard work.
It's hard work. And a lot of those guys, like, they were at their arrival. They were at the destination for them. And that's fine. But for me, it was kind of like, what's next?
Just part of the path.
It's the 2-week library card. Now, like, I'm like, okay, what's my next thing? A little bit, and it drives my wife crazy. But she's like, you're done. Like, once the medicine thing happened, she's like, no more careers.
That's it.
This is gonna be it. So
settle in.
Yeah, settle in. We're gonna be doing this for a while, which wasn't easy to do. It's like that kind of professional wanderlust of kind of wanting to
I mean, what else
things.
could you do? Go be an astronaut?
Yeah, that's what she said. She's like, no astronaut. And I won't lie, if I
total hips in space.
Yeah.
Ding ding ding.
I've looked at the requirements for that sort of stuff, like, because they pick some random people for that sort of stuff. Like,
I could see you with the helmet.
Yeah.
Hey, man.
Yeah. But I from the medical side, like, I took the MCAT, which is basically the admissions test, and I didn't kill it by any means, but it was enough. The test is not the true test of whether or not you retain that knowledge is not how you did on that midterm 12 years ago. It's, can you use this tomorrow? Thankfully in orthopedics, like you asked what an orthopedic surgeon is, we get to kind of brain dump a lot of that stuff, because most of what I'm not managing those types of medical conditions.
Right.
Most of what I do, honestly, I mean, you see it's kind of glorified carpentry. You know, you're putting stuff back together from a mechanical standpoint, which is like, that's kind of when I knew, like, again, seeing ER physicians and doing the procedures and that sort of stuff, that was cool to me. And so I thought, you know, working in the street and in the field and seeing those guys, like, I went to medical school thinking I was going to be an ER physician. And so I spent, you know, the 4 years in medical school, and then ultimately 6 years in orthopedic training, and then come out on the end of that to do surgery.
And so you did it.
And we did it, yeah.
Unbelievable.
So, yeah, it's a long process. I remember sitting with where I did my fellowship in Jacksonville. Mayo Clinic has a campus there, and there was a set of high school kids that were there, and I remember talking with them, just kind of just doing a lab, like showing them, like, hey, here's how you use a drill, here's how you use a hammer, like just kind of technical stuff. And it's honest, it's for women in medicine. It's called or women in orthopedics. It's called the Perry Initiative, because it's underrepresented group in medicine that's changed a whole lot. I mentioned my mom in veterinary medicine. Veterinary is an old boys club sort of thing too, and so I always kind of had a soft spot for, you know, women that can kind of push through that a little bit.
And now you have a daughter.
And now I have a daughter, and I'm like, don't. And she's the one that we're moving into a new house. She's the one that wants to get the workshop going and doing the woodworking and just kind of putting stuff together.
That's
and
awesome.
I'm like, you need to know righty tighty, lefty loosey. Like, you need to know how to change a tire. You need to know these sort of things.
I always tell them jokingly, strong, independent woman who don't need no man.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's not, I think knowing how to do those things is important. And, and I tell her, like, it's not tomboyish to,
it's proficient. It's just
proficiency.
life proficiency.
It's proficiency. Like,
same thing with boys learn how to cook and clean.
Yeah, absolutely.
Life skill.
Yeah. So I was talking with those kids at that Perry Initiative, and I'm like, let me tell you something. Let me let you behind the curtain and let me show you the wizard a little bit. And I said, I've been training, not doing this, but I've been training pretty much as long as you guys have been alive. My intern year, like, there were a few times where I was just like, I don't know. This is tougher than what you think, because you do, like, if nobody's there to pull the curtain back and show you, because I didn't have any mentors that were surgeons or anything.
It's all
like
a
that.
surprise.
It's all everything's new, and you're like, man. And at a certain point, then you're kind of so far down the rabbit hole that like which way did I?
Yeah.
Where do I go to turn back? And you can't. And so now you just embrace it and go with it. So then what ends up for me, what becomes next is polishing my craft.
Well, you've ascended to one of the highest positions, not only in our culture, but in the world.
Yeah.
I think it's okay to coast for a little bit.
Sure.
And by coast, we mean refine and polish.
Yeah.
And keep serving society in an unbelievable way. Everything connects in our conversation. I've seen all sorts of correlations, all sorts of connections from you as a young child, very smart, very gifted and talented. By the time you graduated, a little unsure, disinterested. Now your child's going through the same thing. Don't lose sight of that.
Yeah.
Your experience and your success should bring you some comfort that there's obviously opportunities for him, as unconventional as they may be, to be successful. The character that you've built in him, that you built in yourself in that 1.5 mile run, and those long hours, and those times where you're like, man, this sucks, and I'm not sure that I want to keep doing this, but I will not quit and I will not back out. Those character traits, I'm sure they come out in ways you don't even realize. He sees it. Him finishing wrestling, as silly as it may sound, same correlation where he's like, I'm not going to quit. And now you say he's probably going to go back again.
Yeah.
From you, was it the Perry Foundation? Is that what it was
Perry
called?
Initiative.
So speaking at the Perry Initiative and recognizing that your mom was serving in an underserviced field where women weren't necessarily predominant, to now your daughter saying like, no, we're going to freaking, let's branch out. Let's head some stuff up. All the way to your parents coming full circle from saying the socio-political times of when they were young adults where soldiers were seen in a very kind of dark light, to seeing their own son and all the success you had. But your military history is a big part of that. A lot of character and values that you established that's led to your success came from your time in the military.
Yeah, by far.
So I think that looking at all these things and looking at our own life experiences, if we look for ways to find meaningful connections, they're there.
I mentioned earlier kind of that butterfly effect. Like every single thing that ever happens in your path is going to affect. It's some sort of switch
100%.
That's going to cause, and then you kind of work your way back to all of those sorts of things. And
which is why the name of my show is Everything Connects.
It does. It does. And I've sat with my father-in-law and just talked to him about, he's come around recently, just like, he's like, man, I didn't think that this is where things were going to be.
When he brought home that firefighters pamphlet.
Absolutely.
I want to thank you for coming on the show today. Yeah. I want to thank you for sharing your story. And one of the best compliments that I can give you as a guy who works in the operating rooms, I would recommend somebody I love to come and have surgery with you.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Yeah, I think that's I've heard that a few times from some of the folks in the OR, and that's when you know somebody's work and you are comfortable doing that. And to me, it's that trying not to get rattled by things that, you see it, things aren't always like as completely smooth as they can possibly be. And at the end of the day, I think that path that we've been on, my family and my wife and I, and along the way, there have been, different things that could rattle you, and work in the fire service or, military, things can rattle you. And to me, like, yes, like when we're doing surgery, that's like the most important thing is that patient, and anything else, like if it's, I just try to have some, I think, equanimity about the situation.
I'm going to Google that.
Yeah, no worries.
It sounds wet.
It's
like equity,
but anemone.
Anemone.
That's an anemone. That's different.
Oh,
the concept of having your wits about you when everybody else is losing theirs.
Yeah.
So calm in a storm sort of thing. And I think I've worked with some surgeons, obviously through training and that sort of stuff, and I hear stories about tempers and that sort of stuff. Like,
sure.
That helps nobody.
Right.
That helps nobody. And so, to me, I think what that compliment from you and from the staff comes from, some of it is I try not to be rattled about, or at least outwardly rattled about things that, like, I'm not really happy about.
Sure.
Is it going to affect the outcome? Yes or no? Because that part is the only answer,
right.
The only question that needs answered. If it's not that big a deal and it's just kind of an inconvenience to me, not worth stomping your feet over, or throwing things, or, the surgeon kind of persona.
Yeah.
And if it is going to affect outcome, then yes, it requires a different tact, but it still requires, like, that. I always remember somebody telling me whenever I became a corporal, so NCO.
Yeah.
Like,
barely, but yeah.
Yeah, without going to the academy, right? Or NCO, a sergeant academy. But praise in public, criticize in private.
Yeah.
So if it's something that requires some action, then we can handle it. But a temper like that, all that does is make everybody else on edge and
perform at a lower level.
And that's not what we need. We need the opposite of that at that moment. And so I'd like to think that comes from where I've been, but also helps me to kind of foster that idea of, like, oh, I can work with this guy and I can recommend this guy for reasons that are different than typical.
Right.
So
that's exactly it.
Yeah.
I'm reading a book called Range. Everything Connects is the idea that lessons that you learn in one area of your life can benefit you in other areas that you may not be able to foresee. And even while you're reaping the benefits, you may not make the connection that that's where you got this tact from, right?
Yeah.
I'm reading this book called Range, and the guy's whole premise is people think that specializing early and specializing super narrow and deep is the best option. But more and more studies are showing that actually a broad range of life experiences give you more tools in your toolbox. And unless you're really looking to make the connection, you may not see it. Right?
I agree. I think you, in the course of your work week, you work with surgeons, you work with physicians, staff, whatever, that never really had a job outside of, those people who go from high school to undergrad to medical school to residency to fellowship to work. You never pushed a mop.
Right.
You never gotten your hands dirty. You
never cut the grass for Sergeant Major.
Yeah, you don't know how Sergeant Major likes his grass. You know, so I think that empathy and being able to see, like, take care of the team. You don't get that from life experiences. I guess I would say opposite of what I had, or different than what I had. So,
well, you nailed it, Dr. Logan. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah,
it's been my pleasure.
I'm Dr. Logan, former firefighter, Army soldier, and it all connects. Everything connects.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, man.